I reached across the kitchen counter and saw Natalie's work phone light up beside her mug. The screen showed a message from Victor Lang that read, "Room 312, same plan as before." Another line appeared under it. "Bring the file, no delays." Before watching the video, please tell us in the comments. Which country are you watching from? Steam drifted from the bathroom down the hall. The sound of running water masked any small movement I made. I picked up the phone and opened the messaging app. The previous thread showed short exchanges over several days. Each message carried the same pattern: instructions, confirmations, and coded references to vendor reviews. The timestamps aligned perfectly with evenings she had claimed to work late. I scrolled once more and found a location pin attached to one message. It was a downtown business hotel, one she had never mentioned by name. I placed the phone flat on the counter again, screen dimmed, and leaned against the sink. The message tone chimed once more. This one read, "Need confirmation before noon." The sender name stayed the same, Victor Lang. I memorized the number and walked toward the hallway mirror. My reflection looked calm enough. I took her phone with me into the living room and opened the calendar app. A single event sat on the day's schedule labeled Field Review. No location listed. I noted the time in my head, then set the phone face down on the table. The shower stopped. I heard the sound of the curtain, then the door opening. I stepped outside to the apartment hallway under the pretext of checking mail. The air felt cooler, quieter. I stood there holding my own phone and typed a note. "Harbor District, room 312, Victor Lang." I didn't know what it meant yet, but it would mean something later. When I walked back in, she was at the sink pouring coffee. The work phone was still where I had left it. She asked if I had seen her charger. I said it was already plugged in. She smiled, thanked me, and took the phone to her bag. Every movement was routine, efficient, practiced. She wore the same gray blazer she usually reserved for client visits. I watched as she zipped her purse and checked her reflection in the microwave door. She said she might be home late and would text when meetings finished. I said nothing unusual, just told her to drive safe. The apartment door closed behind her. I waited until the elevator hum faded. Then I opened my own laptop and typed the hotel name from the location pin. The listing matched the address sent in Victor's message. Its description mentioned executive suites for private corporate meetings. The coincidence was too exact to ignore. I clicked through to the images and paused on one photo, a glass-walled lounge with silver chairs and a dark carpet. I recognized it immediately from the background of a picture Natalie had once shown me, saying it was a conference venue. I leaned back and stared at the details on the screen. Nothing about it required guesswork. Every piece came from observation: message, address, hotel, room number. I opened a new page in my Notes app and titled it simply Sequence. Then I listed what was visible: phone messages, calendar entries, hotel PIN, and the time she left home. The first 4 points were clear. The next steps would depend on what I saw next. Outside the window, the city was just beginning to move. Delivery vans lined the curb, and commuters crossed the street toward the train station. I closed the laptop, put on my jacket, and decided to follow only what was already visible. No assumptions, only confirmations. The next entry in my notes would come from what I saw firsthand. I left the apartment 20 minutes after she did, keeping a normal pace down the stairwell. The city morning had thinned into a quieter rhythm. I reached the parking area and started my car, waiting until her gray sedan appeared in the side mirror as it exited the street ahead. I followed at a distance, keeping 2 cars between us. Her route stayed direct. No detours, no stops. She turned onto the main road leading downtown, past the cluster of business hotels and offices. When she slowed near the Harbor District, I knew exactly where she was heading. Her car pulled into the lot beside the Harbor Suites. She stepped out with her bag over one shoulder, talking briefly on her work phone. She looked calm, composed, professional. She entered through the revolving door without hesitation. I parked across the street beside a delivery van and watched. The front desk clerk greeted her with a nod, as if she was a familiar guest. The exchange lasted seconds before she took the elevator. I wrote down the sequence: arrival, acknowledgement, access. Back at my car, I opened my own phone and reviewed her calendar again through our shared work app. The event marked Field Review had just begun. It was scheduled for the next 3 hours. I checked her location tag in the shared network and saw it still pinned within the Harbor District. The confirmation removed speculation. I decided to observe, not confront. Confrontation ends detail. Observation builds record. Later that day, she returned home exactly on time, her voice casual, tone steady. She said meetings had gone well and that Victor was planning to assign her a new client soon. She mentioned him naturally, the same way she might mention a co-worker. I nodded and asked how her presentation went. She said fine, and her eyes didn't shift away. I noted the alignment of words and posture. Both were trained. The next morning, I checked the shared expense portal for her department. A line appeared under her name: Client Hospitality, Harbor Suites Cafe. The total listed 2 beverages and 1 meal. The receipt matched the hotel's name and confirmed payment by company card. The entry date matched her Field Review. I saved the details, marking it in my notebook under Visible Correlation. Over the next few days, patterns multiplied. Her commute hours changed slightly, though her official meetings on the shared calendar stayed identical in length. Each time the name Victor appeared in email summaries, her replies shortened to 1 or 2 words. The tone had shifted from formal to minimal. I printed the differences and placed them side by side. They looked like progression without content, conversations that carried meaning only between 2 people. One evening, I found a folded parking stub inside her jacket pocket. The logo at the top belonged to the Harbor Suites. The date matched the expense record. I placed it back exactly as I found it. Observation only works if the subject remains unaware. That night, when she fell asleep, I sat by the window with the city's noise faint outside and wrote the day's facts in a small notebook. Every entry stayed neutral: location, object, timing, exchange. I didn't write words like suspect or betrayal. They added nothing. The pattern already spoke in data. Each piece was verifiable by anyone who looked. My next step would be verification outside our shared systems, information that neither of us controlled. I closed the notebook, checked her phone resting on the counter, and watched as a new notification flashed across the screen. It came from the same contact, Victor Lang. The preview line read only, "Same location tomorrow." The next morning, I left the apartment earlier than usual and drove toward the Harbor Suites before her schedule began. The sky was gray and clear enough for distant reflections on the hotel glass. I parked near the side entrance where deliveries came in and waited. At exactly the hour her calendar marked off-site briefing, a gray sedan identical to hers entered the lot. She stepped out, holding her leather folder and her work phone, and walked straight through the automatic doors. There was no hesitation, no pause to check messages. She greeted the same doorman, who opened the door as if repeating a familiar action. Inside the lobby, I watched from behind a newspaper stand near the window. She walked toward the reception desk and signed a form that Marcus, the front clerk, handed over. She pointed once toward the elevators, and Marcus nodded. I waited until she disappeared from view before entering the building myself. Marcus recognized me from earlier visits when I had come under a pretext of looking for a misplaced wallet. I asked casually if a meeting room had been booked under Grantwood Logistics, the vendor Victor managed. He checked his register, then confirmed that a private room on the 3rd floor had been reserved under that company's name. I thanked him and left, walking through the side corridor toward the cafe. From there, I could see the elevator reflections on a wall mirror. The doors opened, and Victor stepped out wearing the same navy jacket he had worn in a company photo. He checked his phone, nodded once to a hotel attendant, and walked toward the meeting room hallway. I wrote the name of the room down from the directory board. Orchid Suite. I didn't need to go closer. Each new piece fit precisely. Later that day, I stopped by my office and looked up Victor Lang's profile in the corporate intranet. His department handled supplier accounts and contract renewals, the same department that required review approvals signed by Natalie's team. I pulled up recent procurement records. The vendor reports matched several of her recent project codes. Each transaction had been approved under her ID and finalized by Victor's digital signature. Every authorization followed the same short cycle: request, approval, payment. It was quick, clean, and unusually synchronized. That evening, I called Owen Blake, a colleague from a nearby division who had once mentioned meeting Victor at vendor events. I asked him if those events often took place at the Harbor Suites. He confirmed they did and added that Victor preferred that location for informal reviews. I thanked him and ended the call. His statement aligned perfectly with the hotel receipts and calendar entries. The picture now had internal confirmation. When Natalie returned home that night, she carried her work bag and a folded blazer. Her phone vibrated twice as she set it down. She didn't check the screen until she walked into the kitchen. The preview line read, "Thank you for today, V." She locked the phone quickly, poured water, and started talking about dinner. I nodded, keeping my tone steady, and wrote down the message later from memory. That night, I organized everything: vendor approval logs, hotel confirmations, ride receipts, and message fragments. Each element reinforced the next. There was no need for emotion, no need for confrontation. The facts had already formed their own version of speech. The next step would be confirmation under observation, not from my eyes, but through verifiable authority. If you were in my position, would you reveal it now or keep building proof? Please tell us in the comments. The next morning began without deviation. Natalie dressed in the same routine sequence: jacket, folder, phone, and left after saying she might stay late to finish a proposal. I waited 10 minutes, then left through the opposite exit of the building and headed toward Harbor Suites. The same gray sedan appeared 2 blocks ahead, moving predictably through the intersection. She parked near the hotel entrance again and walked inside with purpose. I followed at a distance, keeping to the opposite side of the street where the mirrored lobby glass provided a partial view. Through the reflection, I saw her standing near the elevator with Victor Lang. He held a black folder and a cup of coffee. They exchanged short words, both smiling briefly before entering the lift together. The motion was ordinary, not theatrical, the kind that comes from repetition. I waited by a newspaper kiosk opposite the building, pretending to read while noting the details: attire, gestures, direction. Each entry matched the pattern exactly. When they disappeared upstairs, I crossed to the cafe beside the hotel and sat facing the lobby. From that vantage, I could see both the elevator doors and the main corridor. I ordered coffee, opened my notebook, and recorded the visible sequence. Entry, elevator, 15-minute interval. I didn't write interpretations, only events. Documentation removes doubt. Roughly 30 minutes later, the elevator opened again. This time Victor stepped out alone, holding the same folder in a small white envelope. He crossed the lobby, spoke briefly to the receptionist, and left through the revolving door. I followed him with my eyes as he walked to a nearby parking lot and entered a silver sedan. He paused to check his phone before driving off. I returned my attention to the hotel entrance. 5 minutes later, Natalie came down, her folder now thicker, her expression unchanged. She stopped by the front desk, signed a slip Marcus handed her, and walked outside to call a cab. I remained seated until her vehicle disappeared from view. Then I went to the front desk and greeted Marcus. He recognized me and asked if I had finally found my missing wallet from before. I smiled and said I hadn't, then asked if I could confirm whether the Orchid Suite had been used for a business reservation that day. He nodded, flipped through a ledger, and said yes. Grantwood Logistics, authorized by Victor Lang, approved by N. Hart. That confirmation closed the loop. Every visual observation now aligned with corporate trace. I thanked him, paid for the coffee, and left. The air outside felt colder, sharper, unfiltered. The city noise sounded distant, muted under the weight of detail. That night, while she prepared dinner, her phone vibrated on the counter. The preview text read, "Everything cleared. Thank you for keeping it quiet, V." I didn't touch the phone. I only noted the exact phrasing. When she left the room to change, I unlocked it with the same passcode she used for work documents. The chat thread showed messages exchanged daily for 2 months. Some were about project files, others about meeting rooms, and a few contained hotel confirmations identical to the receipts I had recorded. One recent message contained a photo of signed vendor papers, with both their initials visible at the bottom. I read none of it twice. Instead, I took the phone to the table, opened a new message window, and typed a short line to Victor. "See Priya first thing tomorrow." I sent it, locked the phone, and placed it back exactly where it had been. When Natalie came back, she smiled, saying she might have an early start. I nodded, handed her the phone, and told her she had a new message from work. She glanced at it, frowned briefly, then put it away. I watched the moment pass without reaction. The next morning, the results of that single message would begin a sequence none of them expected. I woke early the next morning and reviewed the sequence again. Every visible detail now linked together. The messages, the hotel, the vendor accounts, and Victor's signature across her approvals. The last action from the night before had set the next stage. The message I sent from her phone would lead Victor directly to Priya Shah, head of HR compliance. She was known for accuracy and detachment. If a conversation began there, it would unfold under regulation, not emotion. That was exactly what I wanted. Before leaving for work, I printed one clean page summarizing only verifiable data. It listed 4 categories: meeting dates, reservation names, expense records, and vendor approvals. No assumptions, no added language. I placed it inside an unmarked envelope. The label read, "Operational Review, Internal Use." The simplicity would guarantee it reached Priya's desk without question. On my way to the office, I dropped it at reception, addressed to her attention. There was no sender name. It didn't need one. When I arrived at work, I logged into the shared company portal and checked project updates. One notification stood out. Grantwood Distribution Vendor freeze pending audit. The note meant compliance had already initiated a review. The timeline matched the hour Victor would have received the message instructing him to meet Priya. I closed the window and continued working as usual. By late morning, I received a message from Owen Blake, who said he'd seen 2 HR representatives enter Victor's office. He added that the meeting lasted longer than expected and that Natalie had been called down to the compliance wing shortly after. I thanked him without comment. Each new movement confirmed the structure was unfolding as intended. No interference, only procedure. Around midday, I walked past the HR corridor. The door to Priya's office was slightly open. I heard voices, one male, one female. The tone was formal. Papers shuffled. A pen clicked. Then Priya spoke clearly. Both signatures matched the unauthorized release logs. Silence followed. Then Victor's voice, lower now. I thought this was cleared through operations. Priya replied, not without dual validation, and these show personal authorization. The sound of pages turning filled the space again. I continued walking, not slowing my pace. Later that afternoon, an internal notice circulated. Audit underway. Departmental leads to review external vendor coordination. The language was impersonal, bureaucratic, perfect. It indicated escalation without naming anyone. I opened the system dashboard again. Access for both Natalie and Victor now showed restricted pending review. The procedure had locked automatically. I printed the confirmation screen for my own record and closed the file. At home that evening, she arrived earlier than usual. She said work had been strange, that everyone seemed tense, and that Priya had asked her to submit all her vendor receipts again. I asked why. She said she didn't know, but Victor had been in a long meeting with compliance. I nodded, said that internal checks were common during audits, and changed the subject. The rhythm stayed calm, conversational, unremarkable. When she went to bed, I sat at the table and wrote one more short note to myself. Chain complete. External verification active. Every stage had relied on observation, not confrontation. The plan wasn't built on exposure for spectacle. It was built on process, the kind that documents itself until truth becomes a matter of formality. The next day would begin with confirmations, written by people who had no idea how the sequence started. When I arrived at work the next day, the building felt unusually quiet. The usual hallway conversations had given way to closed doors and muted calls. The corporate intranet displayed a notice from compliance. Vendor audit under review. Temporary suspension of affected accounts. The wording was neutral, but I understood what it meant. The process had advanced to formal examination. The audit team now had the data I'd structured for them. Clean, verifiable, self-explanatory. Mid-morning, Priya Shah's assistant circulated an internal summons for several employees, including Victor Lang and Natalie Hart. The meeting location was listed as Compliance Conference Room A. I watched from my office window as they walked down the hallway separately. Victor carried a stack of folders, his movements brisk and confident. Natalie followed minutes later, clutching her phone and a small notebook. She didn't look confused, just focused. The glass walls of the conference room revealed nothing but silhouettes and motion. I saw Priya enter last, carrying a sealed envelope, likely the one I had addressed. The meeting lasted the better part of the morning. I kept working while the corporate chat filled with speculation about a possible contract freeze. When the door finally opened, Victor exited first, face impassive, followed by two auditors carrying documents. Natalie walked out next, slower, speaking quietly with Priya. They turned toward HR's private corridor, leaving the main floor silent. I wrote down the sequence in my notes. Meeting concluded. Separation initiated. Audit escalation probable. By early afternoon, an email alert confirmed it. Effective immediately. Project approvals from Logistics Division placed on hold pending investigation. Beneath that line, both Victor and Natalie's names appeared under restricted. It was no longer assumption. Compliance had acted. I leaned back in my chair, the same calm, steady rhythm guiding every thought. Nothing about the situation required reaction. The process itself had reached motion. Later that day, Owen stopped by my office. He closed the door halfway and said quietly, "They caught something big. Looks like vendor credits being redirected under Grant Wood's account. Finance traced it to 2 approval IDs. He didn't mention names, but the implication was plain. I asked how HR was handling it. He said Priya had brought in external auditors and that Victor's access to corporate systems had already been suspended. He's not coming back," Owen said. "And your wife might have to explain how she didn't see it." I thanked him for the information, gave no opinion, and returned to my work. Before leaving the office, I checked the company notice board again. A new line appeared. Executive review scheduled for morning. Participants: Victor Lang, Natalie Hart, compliance team. The order of names said enough. Leadership would hear the evidence next, not whispers or assumptions. Evidence. At home, she mentioned the meeting briefly. Her voice stayed neutral. She said compliance had flagged certain purchase orders and that she had been asked to clarify the authorizations. I asked how Victor responded. She said he claimed it was all an accounting misunderstanding and that the auditors would clear it soon. I nodded, offered no comment, and returned to my notes. Before sleeping, I looked once more at the simple statement I had written a day earlier. Chain complete. External verification active. It had proved accurate. What began with a message on her phone now existed inside official reports, signed by people whose jobs depended on truth. The next morning would bring final action. The documentation was complete. The consequences were in motion. Would you call this revenge or justice? Please tell us in the comments. The following morning, the company released an internal announcement marked Confidential Compliance Action Summary. The statement was short and factual. Irregularities found in vendor coordination between logistics and operations. Responsible personnel removed pending further review. No names appeared, but the implication reached every department. The listed divisions matched those where Victor Lang and Natalie Hart had worked. The chain of consequences had begun. By noon, word spread through the building that Victor had been escorted from his office after a closed-door executive review. 2 security staff accompanied him as he cleared his desk. He carried one briefcase and handed his ID badge to HR at the front desk. The action was routine, not dramatic. No voices raised, no arguments exchanged. The process had stripped emotion from the situation, leaving only procedure. I watched from the hallway intersection as it happened. No one approached him. Colleagues who once sought his attention now kept their eyes fixed on screens. An hour later, I saw Natalie walking beside Priya Shah toward the compliance department. She wasn't escorted, just guided. Her access card still worked, but her name had already been removed from the department's shared portal. I checked the intranet, and Her profile displayed the words, "Under administrative review." I wrote the update into my notes, keeping the sequence continuous. That afternoon, Priya sent an internal message to all department leads. The subject line read, "Revised Vendor Policy Implementation." Attached was a list of new rules: dual authorization for approvals, third-party review for external payments, and independent verification of expense receipts. These were the structural corrections that followed the fallout. The same hotel where I'd first seen Natalie's car was now blacklisted from future vendor use. The revision completed the circuit between observation and reform. I heard later from Owen that compliance had discovered an additional layer beneath the misuse. Victor had been routing perks through personal accounts under vendor sponsorships. Natalie's signatures had served as operational cover. The system flagged duplicate invoices, forcing investigators to connect both names formally. When questioned, Victor admitted to approving transfers, but claimed Natalie had initiated them. The statement conflicted with every timestamp. The evidence made his defense irrelevant. That evening, HR issued a final bulletin confirming Victor's termination for cause. The company's legal team began recovery proceedings for financial losses and referred the case to regulatory auditors. Natalie was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending final disposition. Priya called me the next day to confirm that my department would receive updated compliance templates based on the incident. Her tone remained professional and distant. She never mentioned my connection to Natalie, nor did she need to. The system had already separated personal and procedural spheres. At home, the apartment felt different. The small details stood out: her mug still in the sink, her perfume faint in the hallway, her shoes near the door. I didn't move them. Each object represented a version of time that no longer existed. She called once that night, saying she would stay at a friend's place while things settled down. I said that was fine and ended the call. There was nothing left to clarify. Over the next week, Victor disappeared from professional networks entirely. His name was removed from project records, and his company email domain deactivated. Natalie's suspension turned into separation by the month's end. The message from HR was direct and unemotional. Employment terminated under Section 12, Conflict of Interest. The outcome matched exactly what the data had promised from the beginning. The balance had been restored through formality, not confrontation. Every action followed procedure, every outcome documented in the same calm rhythm that had started with a single message. 3 weeks after the investigation closed, the company released its final audit summary to all department heads. The document outlined the chain of events in neutral language: unauthorized vendor access, dual-party oversight failure, procedural reform implemented. No names appeared, only departments and corrective actions. The last page carried a line from the legal team: case concluded, internal controls strengthened. It was the corporate equivalent of a full stop. Nothing about it mentioned betrayal, only process. In the following days, my department adjusted to the new system. Every request now required 2 signatures and an automated compliance check before approval. Meetings with external partners had to be logged through a verified portal. The system worked as intended: slow, transparent, accountable. No one questioned why the rules existed. They simply followed them. The incident had transitioned from memory to structure, from action to policy. Priya Shah called me into her office a week later. She said the board appreciated my cooperation during the transition and that my team's documentation accuracy had been instrumental in maintaining operational continuity. Her tone was formal, not friendly. I thanked her, signed the acknowledgement form, and left. Recognition didn't matter. The process had spoken for itself. At home, the apartment remained silent. Most of Natalie's belongings were gone. Only her old desk remained, empty except for a few stray receipts and a pen. I packed them into a small box and left it near the door. There was no need for confrontation or closure conversation. The events had already written their own conclusion through sequence and evidence. I changed nothing else. The rest of the apartment stayed as it was, functional and organized. Occasionally, I saw her name in forwarded legal memos, referenced only as former employee. She had signed a separation agreement and a non-disclosure clause. Her departure was clean, administrative, final. Victor Lang had taken a similar route. Resignation under review, followed by quiet removal from the vendor registry. The hotel that connected them was banned from future partnerships. Every visible link had been erased. The network they built was dismantled by the same system they'd once used to hide it. Months later, during an internal audit meeting, a senior manager referenced the case indirectly. He called it the Harbor Protocol, the model for handling undisclosed vendor relationships. The phrase drew faint nods from those who knew, silence from those who didn't. I said nothing. The facts didn't belong to me anymore. They belonged to the institution that absorbed them. What began as observation had become precedent. On weekends, I often walked past the harbor suites. The same revolving door turned steadily, guests coming and going, unaware of what had once happened behind those glass walls. The reflection in the lobby still showed the same pattern of movement. Arrivals, departures, brief conversations, a sense of routine that could belong to anyone. I would stop across the street for a few minutes, watch, and continue walking. The place held no weight anymore. It was just another building with a record attached to it. I transferred to another regional office soon after. The new location overlooked the river and felt quieter, detached from the noise of downtown. My role focused on data verification and process audits, the same skills that had resolved everything before. Order and clarity replaced uncertainty. When people asked what I had learned from the previous year, I gave the same answer each time. Patterns always reveal themselves. The only requirement is patience. Truth doesn't need confrontation. It only needs space to be recorded. The cycle had closed: discovery, exposure, correction, and reform. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just completion. What would you have done differently? Comment your opinion below. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories.